The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon to all of you, and welcome to this webinar today on women entrepreneurs in the future of work. We are very excited. We have two excellent speakers with us today, Sarah Gammage from ICRW and Alice Clavel from Wagon in France. So I will start with just giving some introductory remarks about why we are here and why UN Women and We Empower is organizing this webinar today. Then we'll move into the presentation by Sarah, and we'll hear from Alice, and then we'll open up for questions and answers. And we'll also have a few polling questions, one in the beginning and two at the end. So encourage you to participate in those questions that we have for you. If you have questions for us, I'd like to encourage you to put your questions in the comment box. It's a questions pane, but you can also raise your hand if you'd like to speak yourself. Can I just ask everyone to mute their microphones so we don't have this echoing sound? So my name is Anna Fälth. I'm the manager of the We Empower program in G7 countries. We are focusing on women's economic empowerment. And the overarching theme of our program is the future of work. And today we are focusing specifically on the situation of women entrepreneurs in the future of work. And it's a very exciting topic. We look at, or Deloitte has defined for us the triple approach to the future of work, looking at work, the workforce, and the workplace. But we know that the future of work is in everybody's mind in these days. It is rapid and profound. Oh, there's a poll coming up. Okay, so let's do the poll first then. And to hear from you, this is the one question that we have in the beginning, to just know what sector you're from. Are you from academia, university, and think tanks, or are you from government, business and private sector, media, or civil society? If you could complete the poll, and then we'll move on with our exciting topic of today. Okay, I think we can close the poll. We have 83% voted, and we see that their majority is from business and private sector. And we also see high interest in this topic by civil society and government and academia. We also have a few people from media, so welcome everyone to this conversation that we have today. So you see the result, and I encourage all of the two panelists today to take this information into account as you also make your interventions. So back to the topic, exciting topic of the future of work, where we see this rapid and profound transformations driven by technology, innovation, and many other factors. We see that talent is being looked at differently, skills, systems, teams. We're kind of being in this turmoil of change, and what do we need to think about, and particularly for women entrepreneurs, what do we need to keep in mind? And this is what we have our two speakers to address today. And I just want to emphasize that we see both opportunities but also challenges in this area for both gender equality and women's empowerment, but also more broadly. So getting ahead of the game, this is what this slide we use to kind of encourage everyone to think big, think ahead of the game. We know that many of the professions today that exist today would no longer exist tomorrow. and in the future. So let us be creative. Let us think out of the box and see what are the kind of jobs that we either will be employed to, or we might be actually the creators as women entrepreneurs to create those new jobs, to really think ahead. And this comes from a book that we have pulled out some of these professions that we thought were quite interesting and thought-provoking. That if we know that there will be artificial intelligence, we'll have more robotics in our society, what about becoming a robot counselor? If we know that everything will be so complex and complicated, what about becoming a simplicity expert that simplify things for others that are moving in this very complex situation? We know that we are moving towards more sustainable forms of energy. So what about thinking about solar experts? Not only how to install it, but how to move this whole sector forward and make sure that we have sustainable energy, etc., etc. So there's a lot of things to think about that I wanted to show with this slide, and really for us to think out of the box when we're moving into the future work, and really invest in knowledge and skills to be able to go from lifelong learning to lifelong employability. And we hear often companies that are trying to see, oh, but we don't have many women in our sectors, how can we engage them? And a very quick fix for some of them have been to let women drive our trucks, let women drive our cars. But we know that the world is moving towards self-driven or automated vehicles. So why investing in skills that might not exist in the next 10 years, or that might not be a high demand for in the next years? So just very briefly about the program, We Empower program. It's funded by the European Union, and we are implementing it in collaboration, UN Women and ILO. And it's really to look at the future of work and in a broader sense, and what does that mean to engage with different stakeholders? What do we need to get ready for as a government, as civil society, as the private sector, and particularly as women? How do we prepare ourselves for this new world as employees and workers, or as entrepreneurs, as we are tackling today? We are doing this through dialogues, webinars, collection of good practices and lessons learned, but also we are focusing on the women's empowerment principles, because it's not only about individual women to get ready for this situation, but also companies. We want companies, and if I can see the next slide, we want companies to engage with our women's empowerment principles. We'd like companies to also prepare themselves for the future of jobs and the future of work, to make sure that the demand that we'll see fits. Just as one example is work-life balance. How do we deal with work-life balance in this changing world of work, which is covered by, for example, the Women's Empowerment Principle #2. How do we deal with situation of online harassment and bullying? We have that under principle #3, etc., etc. But in today, since we are talking about women entrepreneurs, we also encourage companies to look more into supplier diversity, and make sure that under principle 5, women are involved in the value chain and supply chains. So we have about 2,000 web signatories so far, and we are looking to expand this group of companies that are really committed to gender equality and women's empowerment. We have here a very, very brief, I will leave it for all of you later when you get the copy of this recording to this webinar to read. But basically, our Deputy Secretary General of the United Nations talks about the importance of the women's empowerment principles and how it will help women, families, communities, and everyone, including business, to not be only more profitable, but less risk, facing less risk, but also that it is the right of women and men to live in an equal and equitable world. So I will just leave it at that and hand it over to Sarah Gammage. She's the Director of Gender and Economic Empowerment and Livelihoods at ICRW in Washington, D.C. Sarah, over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to be able to engage. And I'm going to share a few slides just to give us an overview of some of the issues we think are emerging in this new world that we find ourselves in, and as we look into the future of work. Next slide, please. Can I have, thank you. Next slide. So we've been conducting some research, and we usually begin our research by doing systematic overviews of the literature and really sort of scraping the data that are out there and looking at different reports, organizations, peer-reviewed journals, grey literature to see what is going on and who's writing and thinking about the future of work. And what we find is clearly that a big piece of this, as Anna outlined, is there's going to be much more technology and the use of digital platforms. We also think there's going to be greater automation, and you can see some of these trends already in different sectors, including in the care sector, which is something that I think is worth us considering, because the future of work is probably also going to be about the future of care as we age and our societies age, but we live longer. So it's very interesting to see that traditional sectors that perhaps we hadn't thought about would become automated have a tendency and a potential for automation. So what happens when this occurs? You know, we know the stories of the Luddites in Britain who were very concerned about the Industrial Revolution and how it would displace their jobs and displace their opportunities for work. So what this looks like will depend very much on how we're prepared for this and what our skill sets are and whose skills are going to be demanded and how. So whether or not people get displaced from certain sectors or whether or not it creates new opportunities for work, we don't know what the net effect is going to be on total employment, but the chances are that if it is labor displacing, there may also be opportunities for the creation of employment in the leisure sector. So it's going to be very interesting. It's unlikely that everybody will face equal opportunities going forward. And we may need, as governments, we may need as civil society, as unions, as producer associations, to think about how we equip our members and think about how we protect the most vulnerable in this process. Another clear trend that we're seeing right now, and forecasting into the future, is much more flexible work. Work where people engage through things like the platform economy and the gig economy and choose when and where they work and offer up the amount of work that they choose to do. This also looks like it's going to be a lot more independent work, a lot more own account work. And this is where entrepreneurs and individuals who are trying to combine, say, their caring responsibilities and their work responsibilities may be much more likely to engage in this future of work. Saying that more flexible work is better for me, so I am going to seek to find out how I can do it. How can I use this platform economy to sell my artisan products? So how can I use this platform economy to become a driver and a chauffeur? Or how can I use this platform economy to offer very specific boutique services to a set of people who either require them at certain times or require them in certain places? So this, I think, is what we're seeing, this trend towards more flexible work. There could be, however, a greater stratification of work through this process, and this is where we need to be alert. We will probably see very highly segmented labor markets that are stratified by skills, because a lot of this engagement, particularly with the platform economy and the gig economy, is about being tech savvy, about being able to manipulate and use technology, about having access to the internet. And this could actually pronounce and exacerbate some of the skill differences that already exist. we are certainly also seeing that in that sort of evolution towards more flexible work, we are likely to see many more outsourced and independent workers. And I think this is where some of the concerns arise, particularly for entrepreneurs, for small businesses, for small groups of folk coming together to form cooperatives, or however they structure their enterprise. Does this mean more informality? And when I talk about informality here, we're really concerned about the fact that much of our labor markets, or many of our labor markets in the G7 countries, have really developed where your ability to get a pension or access healthcare is very much contingent on your labor market insertion. What job you have, what benefits your employers offer, how you buy into or purchase those. So in a context where people are working independently and there's a sort of profusion of more independent workers and outsourced workers, questions about social protection, pensions, savings, healthcare will definitely arise. And we've seen it very much in the discussions about the platform economy, the Ubers, the care.coms. Who is the employer and who is responsible for those contributions? And does that mean that our systems that allocate the rights to pensions and healthcare need to be changed? It's obviously a lot easier in a context where there is a universal right to healthcare and where basic pensions are protected. But in an economy such as the United States, where people transact in that economy and their labor market insertion certainly determines their access to healthcare and to benefits and to pensions, we find, that there's a likelihood of greater informality. So the context matters, the country matters, the social protection policies will matter for these workers. Next slide, please. So this is where I think we have some very interesting data and findings. This is a report that the ILO produced last year, and it really says that in aging economies, and this is particularly the case for the G7 countries, we are going to see a massive expansion of demand for care and potentially supply of care as we age. And so this is a forecast of what it's going to look like if we invest in care and we create much more sort of enabling environments to support care services. And this is a forecast of that expansion of care work, particularly in the future of work. Next slide, please. So we know that technology and the gig economy and many of the sort of opportunities that we are beginning to see in the future of work are fundamentally related to skills and your ability to access and use those technologies. We also know that they offer incredibly innovative platforms to address things like financial exclusion. We've certainly seen it being used in the developed world and the developing world to promote healthcare, to transfer government payments, to educate and inform. There's an awful lot of TVET and STEM education courses, entrepreneurship courses. The internet is a tremendous source of educational tools, and it's also one that's amazingly flexible and that people can choose to access when they wish to. So this can really build into that sort of aspiration for lifelong learning. We also know that digital platforms can overcome restrictions of geography, reduce the transaction costs of using financial services, and enhance transparency and accountability in the transfer of money and payments. This has been actually very powerful in many global supply chains where they've been working extremely hard to reduce informality in those supply chains. So digital wage payments can be a fantastic way to avoid corruption, graft, wage garnishing, to increase the transparency of earnings, but also to interlink those with taxation and fiscal programs. So if you want to build people into the formal economy, the chances are that is what you need to do as well. This may be more important in the developing world, but I think it has tremendous implications for the future of work in our G7 countries to ensure that those jobs are not informal, and to ensure that people really are enfranchised and benefit, and to really sort of contribute to the economies and the social contract that we have with our governments. The other piece of this is by enabling data capture and storage, digital platforms will reduce the informational asymmetries between lenders and borrowers. So even in the G7 countries, we still have quite substantial gaps in use of financial services and products. Maybe not to the degree that we observe in the developing world, but we do. And these gaps are very gendered. So there are real opportunities here to use these platforms to increasingly bank people who are unbanked, to avoid those cash checking, payday loans, which are very predatory, and bring people into formal financial services, which actually enable them to take better loans, better preference rates. You can begin to see how government programs could articulate with this to better serve small sectors or those who are least advancing in this sort of new ecosystem of the future of work. And we also know that digital platforms can link buyers with sellers, workers with jobs. So these are amazingly powerful tools that are going to be fundamentally integrated in the way people offer their labor, render their services, and purchase and consume those services. Next slide, please. So these are just some examples, and I'm sure many of you, and we'd love to hear from you, have some other really great examples about what's going on in your sector, in your issue area. Care.com, this was launched in the US in 2007, and it is the world's largest online marketplace for finding and managing family care. It has now more than 30.8 million members spanning 20 countries. So this is where you can log on and find somebody who can provide care services, and you can do all the filtering, you can do all of the appraisals, you can do rating. It's a very transparent platform, and it's one that's increasingly being used, and I think is very much part of the sort of approach to how we socialize the cost of care and how we deal with caring in our societies as we move forward. Girls Who Code is another example of how you can bring in particular sectors and perhaps particular excluded groups, enabling them to be part of shaping the digital economy. They don't just want to be consumers of that digital economy, they want to shape it. And given that what we know about investing in STEM and really encouraging girls to be part of STEM jobs and opportunities, this is a tremendous investment in bringing people who have largely been excluded from that directly into the provision of and the co-design of new products and services that are going to be used on that platform economy. I think another key issue, and I mentioned it earlier, is that digitizing wage payments. Digitizing wage payments can reduce wage theft, and this is particularly the case in the restaurant and services sector, in the entertainment sector, anywhere where you're more likely to have someone being hired in a cash economy, where there's much more likely to be wage theft and tax evasion and tax elusion. And this is important as we think about the social contract that we wish to bring together to support those entrepreneurs and to ensure that they don't labor in informality. And then the other example is Work Genius, that was initially started for students. It's a digital workplace that processes projects on a large scale and gets you access to experts. And without an effort to recruit women, 58% of their workforce is women, and they earn 64% of the platform's earnings. So this has been a tremendously powerful example of how you can create opportunities that actually enable women, and we can imagine women who have greater challenges resolving their care and their paid work responsibilities are flocking to this platform for this flexibility. Next slide, please. But there are also concerns, and this is important as we think about what that regulatory environment is going to be, and what we think about how we organize and how individuals organize. We know that markets without rules and regulations can be pretty savage places. And we've seen that organizing and setting rules for how you engage and how you transact is particularly helpful for those who are the most vulnerable, either consumers or workers. So we really do need to understand and recognize the socially embedded nature of technology, and it can produce new vulnerabilities, as Anna alluded to. So now everybody's connected. They're using their phones, they're using Twitter, they're using Facebook, they're marketing themselves. Online harassment, doxing, hacking, online stalking can be an incredibly predatory way to close down some of these opportunities, and we're increasingly seeing it in different realms. So we do understand that technology is socially embedded, and that we're going to have to think about some of these issues to protect the people as they engage and engage in market transactions and engage in employment and service consumption through these platforms. Who has access to the technologies? We've certainly seen some of the studies have underscored that, particularly where care and cleaning services and household services are being digitized, it tends to reward those who know how to use those technologies, who know how to put up profiles, who look more conforming. So the elderly, the older, providers who don't have regular access to the internet, who might be using a public library or a public facility, who don't have the sort of facilities of younger, more tech-savvy groups of workers, may end up being discriminated against and may end up not doing well in this platform economy. So again, we need to think about who has the right skills, how we build those skills, and how we facilitate their engagement. And I think it is worth thinking here also about the fact that when people are exposed to online harassment, it doesn't just stop there. It's not something, and I just want to sort of resurface this, it's not something that, oh, well, just switch your Facebook page off. If this is now the primary platform for your work, you're not going to be able to switch your Facebook page off. You're not going to be able to walk away from it. And the other piece of it is online violence, stalking, doxing, hacking, and a lot of sexting, many different manifestations of these kind of online behaviors that are incredibly predatory are also linked to offline behaviors. So it's not as if this violence isn't very real and doesn't produce very meaningful and painful damage to individuals, their reputations, and their businesses, or their political participation and engagement. Next slide, please. So women have the potential to really benefit from this work, to combine their caregiving and income earning, but it could also compound informalization, as we've talked about it. And I just want to go back to this sort of aspiration of the gig economy as a very flexible place where I am resolving my unpaid care needs and my desire for paid work, and I'll just render the amount of time online that I need or use the platform to engage in work as I need. What we've seen from a lot of these is that actually peak pricing means that you can't really choose when and where to work, and that workers are often forced to work peak demand hours. So in fact, that flexibility depends very much on what it is you're providing. And again, it tends to be greater for the more skilled and the, those who have more formal education. This rating system, just going back to that, we've seen rating systems with Lyft and Uber and many of the ride shares and many of the care services. The rating systems tend to really favor those who know how to present themselves well. They are more tech savvy. They may have more pleasing photos, pictures, profiles. So this is really of concern for those who might be the most vulnerable and potentially excluded as we move forward with the future of work. And again, the risk and prevalence of violence in the gig economy has really not been properly explored. And I think it's very timely as we talk about an instrument to protect the terms and conditions of work and to prevent violence in the workplace. In the ILO this June, at the Labour Congress, I think it's going to be really important that we be mindful of how new forms of violence may emerge in this future of work. Next slide, please. So what are the implications? And I guess I'm wrapping up here to pass on to Alice. Regulation and oversight. Who does it? You know, how do we do it? How do we do it without actually invading privacy, but at the same time protecting consumers and protecting workers in this new future of work? Social protection and pensions. How are we going to make sure that everybody is laboring with rights to social protection and pensions? And again, this is going to be about what is the social contract? What's the context? Who has the right to work? How are they accumulating other rights? How do we need to change labor law? Now with the platform economy, we really don't know who the employer is. And you know, these are not just sort of gig to gig employment. In fact, you know, is Uber the employer of the drivers, or is it the person who picks up that ride every time they pick up that ride? So we really do need to understand the nature and the terms of conditions of employment through this gig economy. And finally, we also need to think very much about tax law. Where are the profits going? How are they being returned to the workers? How are they being reaped by the governments in the economies where these types of employment opportunities are expanding? And I think another thing that we also need to consider here that's not written down, but it's really about organizing. How can the workers, how can the entrepreneurs organize? We have some great examples of where producer associations come together. They can negotiate better input prices, they can negotiate better output prices. If this is going to lead to high fragmentation of employment opportunities and entrepreneurship, there's going to be a need for more organizing, and that may be very technologized, but there's going to be a need for a way that some of these workers and entrepreneurs can come together to protect the terms and conditions of their employment if regulation and oversight is not sufficient. So I think we also need to consider these options as we talk about the future of work and how we as a society respond to it and maximize the benefits and minimize the costs. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much, Sarah, for all this information and thoughtfulness in terms of all the to really lay out the complexity of the future of work and so many different dimensions that we need to tackle, particularly to make sure that gender equality and women's empowerment remains on our agenda. So thank you so much. I will turn it over to Alice. She will give us first a little bit of an account of her own journey in the future of work and also give some very concrete recommendations. Over to you, Alice.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, for your presentation. It was actually, it related a lot to some of the topics I'm going to cover. So that was the question of the general webinar, but before we start talking about the topic from today, I want to tell you a bit more about my journey into coding and entrepreneurship. And for that, I have a nice timeline I've built. So I was born in Paris in France, and I used to like computer when I was smaller, but didn't really made it my study. I studied business in a private business school in Paris. But I was not really convinced by what I was learning. I was really frustrated by the lack of hard skills. So I looked for, and I was not really into working for big corporations. So the only thing that was somehow interesting for me was this student association for where we were meeting entrepreneurs. So we were basically having drinks with small startup founders, and we would listen to their stories. And one of them told us how important it was to learn how to code, and it stuck to my mind. I worked though as a business developer for a startup in Berlin, I love the people, love the environment, but didn't really like the job. And that's how I ended doing Le Wagon during my gap year. So Le Wagon is a training program where you learn web development for 9 weeks. What I did, I fell in love with development, and I started to work as a backend developer. I ended up finishing my master, finally specializing in entrepreneurship, and then I directly worked for Le Wagon in Berlin as a teacher and full stack developer. So I worked for a lot of different startups and gained knowledge, both working from the business side, but also from the technical side. But most of the choice I've made, I didn't do them being self-aware that I was doing the right choices for the future. So most of the choice I've made, I did them because I had some kind of intuition at this moment. But now, taking a step back, I realized that I worked in as one of the most promising, I would say, in one of the most promising field. And I also work for companies that are supposed to be our organizational future. And taking a step back, here are some things that I learned along the way, along this coding and entrepreneurial journey. So the first thing I want to talk about is how you should embrace uncertainty and not be scared of uncertainty. I worked for 3 startups, and one of them I joined when the company was growing like crazy, and after maybe 6 months, it was just crashing down. So most of the company we now work for, we have no idea whether in 2 or 3 or 4 years they might still be there and you have no idea whether you're still going to be a part of them. So you kind of learn, like at the company level, what uncertainty is. And then also at the management level, you often work in very young environments, and people are not especially skilled in management, or they're just learning it. So you often end up being a guinea pig. And it means that, for example, you can start working on projects that are just shut down in the middle, or you have different communication flows, and even the organizational structure of the company might change along the way. So you can't really plan anything. You can't really make a career like you would do before. Maybe you just have to deal with the fact that you take what you can take, and you try to make the most out of your current job and position, and basically companies. And most of the people think that at a technical level you have way more certainty, and that things are more like black and white, right or wrong. But actually tech teams and working as a developer, you're exposed to the same amount of uncertainty, because when you code, when you start working on a project, you have no idea all the problems you're going to encounter. And along the way, you'll have to solve so many bugs, and maybe you're going to spend hours on things where you thought that it would take you minutes, or days on things where you thought it would take you hours. So having a management that tells you, that tries, or that gives you, for example, a hard deadline might not be the best way you can deal with your tech teams. And I think a good advice, if you found your company, and if you, as a woman entrepreneur, you're ending up working with tech teams, I would say the best is just to get rid of this idea that your technical team, that you can plan the work ahead and so on, and just try to create a very fruitful environment where your developers are, I would say, pushed to deliver the best and to deliver fast. And one of the things you should try is really to create this positive, competitive environment where, for example, if a colleague of mine is going to ship a new feature, I'm going to be really proud, but at the same time, I also want to deliver a nice feature and showcase my work. So I think it's creating this very positive environment for your developer team is one of the things that makes, let's say, the environment between the product and developers better. So the second things that I learned somehow the hard way is that you have to let things go. So what do I mean is that as a developer, when you're coding, you know that most of the code you're writing is likely going to disappear. And most of the features you're building are also going to be destroyed. And you spend your time writing things and deleting them at the same time. So it can be very frustrating. But I think the parallel also goes for entrepreneurs, because you can start with a business idea, and then in the months after you realize that it was not the right thing to do, and then you have to give up on everything and start again from scratch. And it's a real muscle that you need to train to really be able of giving up and letting things go. And for example, when I was working at Kitchen Stories, in Berlin, I remember the founders, they started their business. So it was a cooking app where you could basically learn how to cook and cook different recipes. And their original idea was to sell the recipes. But people were not willing to pay for that content because they had it for free on the internet. So instead of spending money into just marketing campaigns and trying to advertise their bundle of recipes, they just said, okay, let's make everything for free and internationalize a lot our app. That's what they did. And then years after, they had to change again because they had to start earning money. So they switched for more like a B2B model. And now they're basically selling content a bit like a media food agency to big food companies. So working there also taught me that it might be on the technical side or on the business side, you always have to let things go and be willing to just drop and not being scared. Also, at the personal level, I realized that I accumulated a lot of short and midterm experiences, and this can sound scary. Because you feel like, oh my God, I can't stick to a job more than 2 years. Am I normal? But I feel like in the coming years, a lot of people will face exactly the same situation and will be very likely to change jobs 7, 8 times and always try to renew themselves. So if I had to give one advice to someone going to the job market now, it would be like, don't stick to a company just because you have this idea that you have to stay for the long run, and just go if you don't learn anymore or if you're feeling frustrated about your job. One other thing that I learned through this journey was that you should never stop learning. So it sounds kind of obvious, and it's easy to say, it's harder to do, I would say. But for developers, it's actually a financial reality, meaning that if you stop learning, your value on the job market is basically decreasing, because at some point you have to keep up with the technology, you have to level up your skills, and your salary is going to be affected by your ability to learn. And something that is even more important than the actual knowledge is learning how to learn first. And part of learning how to learn is learning how to be very autonomous, because no one is born knowing how to code, for example, a website, or how to I don't know, code a live chat or Airbnb-like website. These things, you learn them on the way. But what is important is that you need to be autonomous, and you need to know that you can access the knowledge. And nowadays, any kind of knowledge is reachable and accessible on the internet. It's like you can basically learn anything. The only big obstacle you have to overcome is to be convinced that you can learn by yourself and you can do self-training. And it's really important, because coming from a traditional educational background, where at school people tell you what to do and people tell you how to do them, it's really hard then when you arrive in a job and people tell you now you have to learn by yourself, because at the beginning you don't know that it's possible first, and you don't really know how to learn by yourself. But I think more and more you have the opportunities to learn by yourself, and this is something you should start doing if you're not already, and you should not feel scared about. Sharing your knowledge is also very important, keeping on with that topic of learning among your organizations, to your peers, participating to workshops, trying to deliver this knowledge that you get. Like, as a developer, it's something you do on a daily basis. Like if you work on open source projects, but actually most of the tools you're using are open source, meaning that you have people sharing their knowledge and building them for free for the community, just for the sake of actually building a greater project. And this mentality of sharing is something that should be spread in any kind of field, and also in your business unit, in your organization. And last but not least, I would say expanding your knowledge and your general knowledge and having it from different sources is also very important, because I feel like most of the creativity and innovation comes from the fact that you can have a very diverse knowledge. So I remember I had this like philosophy conference where we had a topic about imagination, and the speaker was telling us about Galileo and how Galileo discovered one of the biggest scientific discovery because he had so much imagination, because he was loving music, because he was a real artist, because he could source his knowledge from so many different topics. And I think it's important today to build yourself I would say a technical general knowledge. So keep up with all the innovations that are going on, and going on websites like Product Hunt, HackerNoon, and so on, and keep up like with the scientific discoveries, but also sourcing your knowledge from other backgrounds, where then when you combine them, it makes really beautiful idea coming out. And we can see it at Le Wagon because a lot of our students are coming from very different backgrounds, like artistic one. We had like, for example, professional violinists. We had people working from design and so on. People with low background, like medicine, and they all combine technology with their previous knowledge, and it just makes crazy and nice projects. And the last thing you should really do if you want to be ready for the future of work is learn to code. And there are many reasons why you should learn to code, but I would say the most important ones to me are first the job opportunities that it gives you, and the fact that it also leads to being financially independent. And I think for women especially, it's very, very important, because as soon as you start earning enough money so you're totally independent, it impacts all the rest of your life. And like nowadays, the coding jobs and the programming jobs are it's where you can earn among the best money, I would say. And there's so few women in this industry that a lot of companies are also implementing positive discrimination policies, and that means that you very easily get a job as a woman developer. And the second thing, like I often hear that people some people tell me, yeah, but as a developer, it's not safe. You have to renew yourself all the time. Technology is evolving so fast. You can be outdated so fast. But actually, this is not true. Like, if you start learning code today, it doesn't mean that your skills are not relevant for the 50 next coming years. And if you look at most of the programming languages nowadays, so they're all come from the C programming language that comes from the 70s. So we're basically using kind of the same patterns since more than 50 years. And I guess that like for most of the technologies you're going to learn, they're not likely going to be outdated after months. It's rather in terms of years that you can count. So this gives you enough time to just enjoy the safety of being a developer. So how do you actually learn how to code? So I would say you have to find the right format. So you have to, we are not learning all the same way, and we don't have all the same motivation, and we don't have all the same amount of time available to us. So you can learn to code online using online coding platforms. Some of them are free. For some of them, you have to pay. So you have Codecademy, for example, which is very well known. You have a free code camp. I have the links within the slides. You also have, if you want to learn more computer science, so something more academic, I would say, you have the online course from Harvard, but also you have other online courses on Udemy, on Coursera. But this takes quite a lot of time, and you need to be really motivated, I would say, because often you learn on your own, so it requires that you already learned before on your own, and you know like how to motivate yourself and so on. While offline, you also have solutions like going to meetups and going to workshops. So I link to the page from Le Wagon workshops, because we do give a lot of workshops, especially targeting beginners. So if you want to start learning to code, that's a good first step. And then you also have groups focusing on girls, like Race Girls, Women in Tech, Women Who Code. So these groups are also for beginners that wants to kickstart their journey into programming, but also you have more experienced mentors there to help you. You also have bootcamps, so I provided a full list of all the bootcamps available, and this is I would say, a fast-track solution, because in 3 to 6 months you learn how to code, and this saves you a lot of time if you really want to do the career change. So pattern we see often among the students is that they start going to workshops, they start going to learning a bit online, and then when they feel like they really like it, they decide to join the bootcamp, so it goes fast. And last but not least, you can also go to tech conferences. I mean, you might be a total newbie or someone with already a bit of programming experience. It really broadens your, I would say, your horizons. And sometimes you encounter some topics and you're like, oh, this is very interesting. And then you can start digging into those topics. So I highly recommend it. So that said, I think there's still a lot of work to do. No?
Yes, I think we have just a few minutes left, and there are also a few questions. So if you could just wrap up, and then we'll just take a few questions before we close in 5 minutes.
All right. Well, very quickly then, maybe next slide is great. Okay, I often hear people telling me I'm not a technical person, and I just want to emphasize the fact here that you should never say that, because technical, like tech, is just a tool in itself. It's not an end, so it's just something you use to do something else. And I think everyone is suitable for code, and everyone is suitable for programming, and there's no such thing as not being a technical person. And I often hear it also from friends of mine, like female friends of mine, and they kind of set themselves away from technology by saying it. And I think this is something you should really fight, and try not to just try to fight this aversion for technology, and go to it, start learning. And it doesn't mean necessarily that you have to end up being a developer, but at least you should be aware of what's happening. Next slide, please. And yeah, among the other, I would say, things we really need to work on before we're really ready for the future of work, I would say, is confidence. So, and what we have imposter syndrome issues. So I would say a lot of women in the tech industries, and myself included, are facing confidence issues, because we're not really like the typical developer type, and some people might doubt of our technical skills just because we're women and we don't look like the typical developer. And I would say this is something that can also be self-generated. So really, I think one of the things I still need to do, and I see a lot among my female coworkers, like we have to work on those confidence. And having more diversity into this field, having more women role models as well, is something that really helps, and that helps or any woman that wants to get into coding as well. And yeah, just to conclude on that, you also have additional resources I've attached if you want to kickstart your journey.
Thank you so much, Alice. This is very helpful, and I encourage everyone to look at the recording afterwards and explore those resources that were shared. We are running very towards the end. We have 3 minutes left. We have one question so far that I think we can have time for. So we have given a lot of recommendations today for the broader future of work, and specifically for women entrepreneurs, what they should keep in mind. But could we give some key recommendations to some of the other people on the webinar? What can governments, civil society, academia, and media help drive this so that women entrepreneurs are not the losers of the jobs of the future and the future of work? So what can we in the enabling environment, as we call it here at the United Nations, do to support women entrepreneurs? So is there anything, Sarah, from your side, or Alice, 1, 2 key recommendations in terms of that support from governments, media, civil society, or academia that you like to share?
Sure. Oh, sorry. I'll do this. I'll put my camera back on. I think we actually don't know enough about the future of work, and we don't know enough about the stratification of the opportunities. Who's being left out? Who needs more support? Who's lagging? So I think academia has a tremendous role to play exploring exactly that topic. I think we also need to understand the lived experience of work in this future of work, and particularly with the gig economy. So I think we also need to have media actively engage and disseminate and diffuse and sort of engage with workers to talk about experiences so that we really understand the nature of work in this economy. Civil society, I think, has a role to play organizing and engaging as well, and engaging governments and holding the duty bearers to account, particularly around issues of regulation, oversight, labor law, access to rights, access to pensions. You know, how are we going to maximize the benefits and reduce the costs in terms of informality, particularly for entrepreneurs? And I think civil society has a tremendous role there to play, literally holding the duty bearers to account. The companies that are employing these sort of very different types of entrepreneurs in their supply chains, the governments that regulate and do that oversight. So here I think there's a role for all of us to actively engage, but particularly to make sure that those who are most vulnerable are not left out, and that this doesn't become a more exploitative work environment than the one that we already have.
Well, maybe I can add on top to that. I think at the moment, there are a lot of opportunities, I would say, for already working people in terms of maybe gaining more skills towards technologies and getting ready for the future work. But there's a lot of work needed also at the levels of, I would say, people in high schools or even younger children, since this is the moment where they're going maybe to choose their path in life, and it's not so well explained, like what are the opportunities out there and what they should learn. And especially as a girl, when you're 17 years old, it's not like people will tell you to go for studying, I don't know, computer science or something, like since there's not so many role models as well, like they're not identifying themselves, and they're not really willing to go into those fields, while this is where we really need them.
Thank you so much. This is very useful. Thank you so much, both of you, to also remind us of the 2030 agenda and the Sustainable Development Goals, and make sure that we leave no one behind, no woman, no girl left behind in this agenda. And also the importance of role models. We don't have enough role models, so if all of us can come together and speak up and recommend young women as well to take this road, but also to be aware of the challenges and the risk as well. So we'll end here. There has been a lot of comments to both of you, Alice and Sarah, congratulating you for your very excellent presentation. So very exciting. So I'd like to also make the last two poll questions with the satisfaction of the audience, very satisfied, somehow satisfied, neither satisfied or dissatisfied, somehow dissatisfied, and more information is needed. Of course, more information is needed. We can never have enough. But I encourage all of you to respond to this poll question. Yes, so always a lot of information needed. But congratulations to our two panelists today for having shared excellent information. The final question is, if you are interested to stay informed and engage with the We Empower program in G7 countries, and also as we are rolling out our work on women entrepreneurship in the future of work. And how informed are you today on this topic? How informed do you feel today about this women entrepreneurship and the future of work? Great. Very good. Thank you very much. And we will circulate the slides and the recording to all of you. And so just stay tuned, and thank you so much to all of you, and particularly to Alice and Sarah for your excellent presentations.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.